Good evening and welcome to another episode of Apolitically Incorrect Guyana. As usual, I'm your host, Kian Jaboor, and this evening, as promised last week, I have a very, very fantastic guest with me, somebody that is renowned in this country, having played such a pivotal role in the 2020 election, and is a executive, correct me if I'm wrong, General Secretary of a new and united Guyana. Mr. Timothy Jonas is here this evening with me. How are you, sir?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me here again.
Thank you for again. And you know, we'll be here as much as we can possibly have you because, like the public, I am always enthralled and always, taken back and given some different perspective from your insights. All right. So we've had a lot going on in Guyana since you've been here. And I'm sure, like everyone in the country, we've had a chance to really see the elections campaign start. We've watched all the various political parties, the main two parties in particular, begin their campaign mode. And what we've noticed is we've already seen some of the turmoil starting, some of the normal, as per usual, kind of race baiting, a lot of aggressive talk being portrayed to the public at the various campaigns that are outgoing on outreaches. So what I'm going to start by doing here today is, as Anug would like to be one of the political parties sitting in the arena in this country, obviously, as a third party, what is necessary is dealing with situations like this, because this country, since independence, has been torn by racism and the two-party system, blame game back and forth. And what we're going to have to address if and when the time comes that Anug becomes the third force in parliament, creating that minority government, are going to be having to deal with situations like these. How we are going to address these on a full frontal manner and approach in order to resolve them, how we deal with it in parliament and ensuring that the Guyanese are not who are suffering because of these types of things. I'm curious to know what your input is, having once again seen this video clip we're about to show of the WPA representative at an outreach in Boxton spewing some very, very hateful remarks and to an extent inciting violence in this country. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play the clip. I'm going to ask my operators to play the clip and we'll have your input after. Is that okay?
Sure.
Great.
Happy to do it.
Please.
A white diplomat pulled me in a corner and he said, I don't understand how people complaining that they are oppressed and they have all the guns in their hands. They are the majority in the army, the majority in the police, and they're still saying they are oppressed. What he was saying, that our problem is of our own making. Our problem is our own making. Anytime we turn those guns in the right direction, it is over.
Chance to hear those types of remarks in 2023 coming from a political leader to a mass of people that he is appealing to their votes. What is your input on why and how and what is the way to resolve these types of situations here in Guyana now?
That was serious. First of all, I think that most Guyanese have reached the stage where we recognize racism. We see it when it happens, we recognize it, and we've had enough of it. So the racism that was demonstrated in that short clip, I suspect it has not persuaded very many people to consider the speaker in any positive light. I don't think he's done himself any favors as a whole in the Guyanese community. The thing is that because each of the two large parties represents one ethnic group, can be identified ethnically. When a party is in power, that party immediately adopts a tone that we are here for all Guyanese. Burnham did it, Hite did it, Jagan did it, all the way down the line to Granger and now to Dr. Ali. One Guyana, we are here for all Guyanese. And the opposition will pick on every issue that arises which demonstrates that, in fact, there is favoritism at play or there is exclusion at play. That has always been the case. So under the last government, the PPP then in opposition were quick to point to instances of exclusion and perceived partiality. Now it's worse. And the reason it's worse is threefold. And we have to look at the truth in an unvarnished way. The first reality is that after being out of power for 20 odd years, when the PNCR with the coalition called APNU came into power in 2015, they fell woefully short of real expectations in their performance in governance. And what that meant is 5 years later, promptly they got voted out by the small majority of swing voters. So they're no longer in a position to say that government of the PPP is so terrible, because there is now a position for comparison, and they have not performed better while they were in government. The second and more important is that they tried to rig the elections in 2020, so that they are not coming from a moral high ground. They are speaking to the people from a position that is so untenable, I don't know how they will resolve it. Even to your own supporters, you have to get across the hurdle that you lied to them. And I have never liked liars. And I don't see how any leader, any politician, anyone who has lied to me is going to convince me of anything after that lie. You fooled me once, that's fine, but it's not going to happen twice. So you have those two issues. And then the third issue is Guyana is now in a position that we're getting a windfall of free money, so that the government can spend everywhere. And you see roads and bridges and cash handouts. It's hard for the opposition to fight that. So there are three obstacles facing the opposition now. And the arguments of corruption in office, of favoritism, they begin to sound hollow if you in your turn were corrupt and increasingly corrupt, and you in your turn were showing favoritism and policies that were excluding the people who were perceived to be opposition supporters. It begins to sound hollow. So all that is left to the speaker is to beat the race card. And that's what's unfortunate. The thing is that the race card perpetuates and holds up both ethnically identified parties. So that is the one constant in Guyana for the last 55 years that we can't get away from. And that's the fallback. And that's where he fell back to. And he fell back into it in a way that showed desperation. So he's not just saying, oh, there's favoritism and it's them against us, which is common theme when opposition people are speaking on both sides, when either side was in opposition. He's now advocating a breakdown in law and order, which is dangerous. And he's not going to get traction. He's not going to get support doing it. But there should be some kind of action taken against him for what he has said. Because at the end of the day, in our country, racism in any guise, in any form, needs to be resisted.
All right. So recently we've had these conversations ongoing. And one of the areas, one of the topics that this clip brought to light was the idea that this is actually not a racism fueled country, but actually a issue of a classist society where you have the rich and powerful oppressing all of the majority of the population and then explaining to them that the reason you're poor is because of racism in this country and pitting them against each other. So this is one, I'm just giving you one of the theories that has been used, and I'm going to ask you your opinion on it. The idea is we are rich and up here trying to fix everything, but you are poor down there, not because of the decisions I am making, but because the other side is not allowing you to get rich or is not allowing you to develop. I myself on just Wednesday here, I had someone try to explain to me that the up to this point, the Demerara Harbor Bridge wasn't built because of political instability. And I found that very curious. What's your opinion on that? How do you see the economic situation in the country being tied in to this winner take all, one side versus the other side politics strategy?
I find it interesting to use the word class because I've been criticized. I've received criticisms for rejecting that class argument. I don't think we should confuse class with money. They're two mutually exclusive concepts. And we have a lot of very wealthy, belligerent ignoramuses out there who beat their wives, who cuss down their family, who feel it's all right to go and drink too much and bully the police. We have a lot of people who are very wealthy, and I would not attribute to them any level of class. So let's separate the discussion into who got money. The way that you most quickly get money in this country is by government affiliation. It's by getting contracts. And even in the last 3 years, we have seen some people from very humble backgrounds who are suddenly prospering. Their lives have been transformed by virtue of preferential government contracts, preferential arrangements, lucrative jobs, lucrative opportunities. And I don't believe that it is realistic to suggest that there is a system of wealthy against non-wealthy, because we're all upwardly mobile. We all want to be able to make a dollar, but the people who are making a dollar are the people who are the government favorites. And during the last regime, the people who were beginning to see their way and collect money on government contracts were people who were the government favorites. That's how you make money. And that leads to corruption, it leads to kickbacks, it leads to secret deals with ministers so that they get a kickback, and that is where the danger is. So you perpetuate yourself in office by whatever advantage you can derive from the fact that you are ethnically identified as a party. But that doesn't have anything to do with what the real issue is, which is power when you are in government, and using that power to be able to give rewards to your faithful so that you in turn benefit.
All right. Okay. That is a absolutely fair response, and it's interesting where, you know, as we go on and we develop, we have this. We're going to continue to deal with this racism scenario. We're going to continue to deal with this type of spewing of an incitement of violence and hatred towards one group or the next. And what we're finding, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'd like you to just divulge, give me some of your insight on how this is perpetuated by the two-party system a little bit more clearly. What do you think is the solution? If so, if not, I mean, we have President Ali preaching, this one Guyana, everybody should come together. Although the PPP have full power, although you are having claims from the other side that they are not given a fair opportunity. So how do you now combat that? What would be the solution to stop this blame game, this back and forth?
It's a peculiar issue that we have here in Guyana, and I think it may also be our redemption. That for the most part, the individual players are not themselves racist in the sense of feeling some kind of inherent superiority by virtue of race, or seeing the other side as inherently inferior because of their race. The individual players, I'll call some names, Nandlal, Ford, Manik Chan, Dr. Ali himself. I've interacted with these people, and you do not discern any racism in these people. They are not racist on both sides. And yet, when you look down the line, by some magic in Guyana, they end up on the side supporting the party with which they identify ethnically. So our problem is not individual racism. We went to Essequibo the other day. You found yourself celebrating a Pago event very happily. We have all been in situations where we find ourselves in a masjid, or we find ourselves near to a temple celebrating very happily, and everybody gets together very well ordinarily. This is not an issue. So why is it that these people who are not themselves as individuals racist, who have risen above racism, and I would say that about them, find themselves in the party with which they ethnically identify? And I think the reason is that there is a perception that because you have two ethnically identifiable parties, if one of those parties is in power, the inevitable result will be preferential treatment to the folk who support that party because they identify the same. And twist it or turn it, that perception is grounded in reality. Because whether or not you are racist, your family is the same race as you. Indians don't make black children, and black parents don't make Indian children. Your friends, your neighborhood, if you go into a village, most of the people around you look like you. So that if you are giving preference to your brother-in-law, or you're giving preference to your daughter, or you're giving preference to a cousin,
right,
the overall effect, numerically speaking, holistically speaking,
right,
is that one side is excluded because the party in power is ethnically identifiable. So this isn't personal racism. This is just the end result of an inevitable consequence.
Yeah, almost systematic. Like
it's accidental. It's not deliberate.
Yeah.
You do see favoritism at a more fundamental level of inherent racism at mid-level management. So if you go into NIS, you may encounter it. If you talk to the guard at the ministry, you may encounter it. If you go in to apply for a piece of land, you may encounter it at the mid-level management. But as our leaders are concerned, for the most part, there is no intrinsic racism there. But the system leads to a racist end result. And that needs to be resolved. And it cannot be resolved if the government also has control of parliament. It cannot be resolved in that system. So you can twist it or turn it. You can say we are government for all the people, as every single successive regime has said we're government for all the people, and half of the people don't even want to hear that from you. And with justification.
And with justification. You know, so again, and then you end up back in the blame game. He says, she says, pointing fingers, it's your fault. And the people end up being the ultimate losers at the end of this, not the politicians. So, you know, you brought up a very interesting, my next topic, interestingly, is our recent trip to Essequibo. We had a chance last weekend to traverse the Essequibo coast, meeting quite a few people and having a chance to really get into some detailed discussion with quite a bit of community leaders, people, villagers, farmers, people from different backgrounds. And I want to have a little chat with you about what your takeaway was from this outreach. I'm gonna initiate it by narrowing it down a bit. We had quite a lengthy conversation with rice farmers, because they, again, are the predominant, that's the predominant income earner on the Essequibo coast. Most of the businessmen over there have some hand to play in the rice farming industry. So we we got our feedback, and I'm rather than me kind of guide you in, I'm going to let you tell me what you took away from that, and we'll see if we'll see what your solutions were as we go along.
Okay. Well, as everybody who has been following our economics knows, our economy has grown exponentially, but all of that growth has been in gas and oil and in its offshoots. So when you look at other areas, mining, agriculture, fishing, that kind of thing, you see little growth and sometimes you see negative growth. There's a stagnation that is alarming, it's worrying. And to its credit, the government has said, publicly has said on several occasions, that we mustn't lose sight of non-gas and oil. We need to be developing our agriculture. We need to be developing our mining and our fishing. But I haven't seen that very good statement of policy translate into actions. And I think that if we are to be meaningful as a small party, we need to sometimes put aside politics and try to propose suggestions, try to suggest solutions that can solve problems. So the last escapade has involved the rice farmers. Rice is in serious trouble. The rice farmers are not planting because it's not making them money. They are complaining that the amount that they invest in the field is more than the return they get when they reap the paddy and sell it. And we've gone around talking to rice farmers to find out, first of all, if this is true and how they perceive the problem. We've had our own ideas, but we wanted to get out there and shoot ideas at the farmers and see their responses. Because at the end of the day, these are the people who know the business, know the numbers, and know they're not making money. So that somebody who planted 10 acres, last crop, closed it down. He not planting because it did not make a return. And that's dangerous. Because if people are shutting down their operations because they haven't seen a profit, overall production is going to drop. And if overall production drops, it's not just the farmers, it's the millers and it's the country. It's the people who are employed there. It is the entire economic substructure. Now, I want to talk a little bit, and I know time always runs. Okay.
No, lots of time. We're not even halfway through.
I want to talk a little bit about what happens in rice. The farmer may own the land. In Essequibo, ownership is more prevalent, or may rent the land. It may be state land, or he may be renting it from someone else. I know in the Mahika-Maikoni area, there's a lot of rental estate land, Habari. He has to spend money on seed paddy. He has to spend money on equipment. He has to spend money on gas, fertilizer, pesticides. He is spending money on a risk. He has to look at the weather carefully. And if everything comes together nicely, he then has a crop that he can sell. Now, none of these expenses are static. And we know, especially after COVID, that fertilizers increased, gas has increased, cost of equipment has increased, pesticides have increased. Overall management costs have gone up a huge amount. Now, when the farmer reaps his crop, he takes his crop to the miller, because the miller will reap the paddy into rice for sale locally or at export. And an issue then arises because the farmer is not satisfied in the price he's getting from the miller. There are a number of complaints the farmer will make. The farmer will say that the scale the miller uses is inaccurate, so that the weight that is announced is not the correct weight of the paddy. The farmer will also complain that the miller will grade his paddy too harshly, unfairly, so that issues of moisture content, of broken grains, of infestation will be used as excuses to give the paddy a grading that is less than what it deserves, and therefore the price that the farmer is offered for the paddy is less than what the farmer deserves. And the effect of this is that the farmer is not making a dollar. And because this is done in his interaction with the miller, the farmer is suspicious of the miller. So there is a tension, a tug of war between the farmer and the miller. And if you speak to the farmers, that's their complaint. That when they go, the grade of the paddy is low, so they don't get paid, and the millers are messing with the weight and with the grading in terms of moisture content, in terms of broken paddy, in terms of infestation, that kind of thing. You can't fix that suspicion. The fact is that numerically speaking, there are a lot of farmers and very few millers. So if you go in the Essequibo, for example, you might have 2 millers, plenty farmers. So the farmer doesn't have much choice where to take his paddy. And there is some legislative relief, because you can't refuse the farmer. If he carries it, you got to collect it. But how much does the miller pay? And every crop, this is an issue. How much does the miller pay for this paddy? It is, of course, in the miller's interest to give you a low price, because when then the miller mills or resells the paddy, or mills it into rice and sells it, his profit margin is larger. The less he got to pay for the paddy, the more he's going to make at the end of the day in terms of his profit margin. And the fact is that common sense tells us the millers are making money. I'll tell you why. Things have become so desperate for the farmers that during the cultivation of the crop, they can't afford certain basics like fuel, fertilizer. They borrow that from the miller. The miller has the financial wherewithal to stock up on things like fertilizer, fuel, to rent equipment. So that during the crop, the farmer goes to borrow this from the miller and collects and then owes the miller. And further, the price that he is paying for this advance, for this material, is higher than the real price of the material. And he is then bound to sell his crop to that miller that he's borrowed from. But the fact that the miller has the financial wherewithal to stock up on these products tells me the miller making money. It tells me that the miller's cut is larger than the farmer's cut. And every crop, you have an issue as to the price offered to the farmer for paddy. And you have calls for the government to intervene, and the government comes down and the ministers come and they rant and they rave and they make promises, so much money for a bag of paddy. And then when they go, the miller says, no, I'm not paying that. Good. The solution that we have proposed to this problem is through legislation. In order to mill rice in Guyana, you need a license. You got to apply under and get a license. You're subject to the oversight of the GRDB. You got to meet some regulatory requirements and that kind of thing. We believe that if the price of paddy is linked as a percentage, is tied to whatever price the miller ultimately resells that paddy or mills it and sells the rice for, if it is linked as a percentage by law, you solve the problem that the farmer faces. An investigation into the miller's profit margins now will enable us to realize what a fair margin should be. And at the time the farmer brings his paddy to the mill, he's paid a price, but with the knowledge that the law requires that miller, when he resells that same paddy which he has turned into rice, he can only keep 60%, 50%, 40% of the sale price. The rest he must pay to the farmers in proportion to the paddy that they have given him. This makes the whole thing transparent, because the miller, when he's selling the rice, he got to declare his sale price to GRDB. It's there. And if that is done, then the farmer knows, first of all, what he can expect for his paddy. He knows that his interest is linked with the miller's interest. It is no longer in the miller's interest to try to undercut the price when he collects the paddy, because as much as he undercuts that price, when it's time for him to sell his rice, he got to pay the farmer the fixed percentage difference. So his interest is now connected with the farmer's interest. And the interest which they share will be profit, because the more he sells for, the more both of them make. And the more the farmer produces, the more both of them make. So instead of their interests competing with each other and the miller trying to shortchange the farmer, real or imagined, but that's the farmer's perception, both of them now have the same shared vested interest of increasing paddy production and getting good prices on the world market. Because both of them know that they will benefit according to a fixed percent of the sale price of the rice on the world market or on the local market, however it goes. We believe that the second aspect of that will be that it divorces the farmer from the need to come as a supplicant hat in hand to the minister every crop to say, I'm not getting enough, the miller's squeezing me, please come and help. And maybe that might not be a good thing in the eyes of the politicians. But it's really time that we give our citizens the kind of dignity that they live in a system that they know what their entitlement is. So that they're not coming cap in hand to say, oh, please give me a good price for my paddy. They're coming knowing that last year they got $4,000. And this year they have to get at least $4,000, because when the rice is sold, they will be getting a percentage. They are now tied. They are hand in glove, tied with the interest of the miller. And the two of them can work together.
All right. So another, I'm going to speak on as though a farmer will respond to that. I can understand and appreciate the legislation ensuring that profit is shared between the two, miller and farmer, to ensure an equitable payout, to ensure that the miller can survive and the farmer can survive. Now, that has a lot to do with the grading, because that is where the price will then be determined on the world market by the quality of rice, because there's different levels of quality. So now that problem will be resolved, then you get into the weight problem. And this is your moisture. This is now where your scales are, showing a ton less, and now the farmers are feeling shortchanged again by another issue that is very common in the mills, which is the weight. How then is that problem resolved?
Well, if I buy 10 tons from you and 10 tons from your neighbor, I should have 20 tons. If I'm selling 25 tons, then mathematically speaking, I have some explaining to do.
Right.
The law requires the transactions between the farmer and the miller to be in writing. And to be informed in that writing is the weight, the quantity, the quality, the grading, and that kind of thing. When the miller now announces that he is exporting a quantity, that can easily be traced back and relayed back to what he purchased from the farmers. He doesn't have much scope for flexibility there. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that the miller will have... The perception is that they shortchange the farmers on weight. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But the system needs to safeguard so that he is not motivated to do it. It's not in his interest. But whatever weight is attributed, if at the end of the day he sells this for $100, he's only getting 60. If he sells it for 1,000, he's only getting 600. The rest he got to pay back to the farmer. And therefore, whatever weight he gives, he is selling at a price, right, and has to give back a percentage, and therefore has no motivation. It doesn't benefit him to try to shortchange in terms of grading or in terms of weight.
Right. So a comment that I just got here, and I think it's another one that obviously I think needs to be enforced a little bit more, is the calibration and the monitoring of these scales in the mills, sorry. And I think that's something that a government agency hopefully can stop the corruption, because we know that the big claim of the farmers is that, the people from GNBS or the people from GRDB is being paid by the millers, and that's why they're agreeing and not and putting false numbers down for them. So that is also a big part of the farmers' complaints.
But again, if you, the farmer, bring 10 tons and I weigh it at 7 tons, I got to sell that same product.
Right.
I got to sell all the paddy you've given me.
Right.
And when I sell it, if I sell it for $10,000, I got to give you back the fixed percentage. So even if you have weighed short, even if you have short weighed the paddy that you say I gave you, you still got to give me a fixed percentage of the rice that you have sold, a fixed percentage of the value. So it's no longer in your interest to fiddle with the scales, even if there are millers who have previously been doing that.
And then obviously legislation that will reprimand the farmer if they do end up selling more than they claim they have purchased. Well, that's where the issue will come in. If the miller says I bought 20 tons, but then goes back and sells 25 tons, who then gets the other 5%? The other 5 tons, the profit from that?
Well, if he does that, then he has very transparently breached the system.
Yes.
But the more insidious problem will be if he has bought 25 and declared 20, but then when he sells, he pretends he has only sold 20, whereas he sold 25.
But then he has the shipping companies, he has a lot more.
He has a difficult time to do that, but he has an even more difficult time explaining the amount of money that came in, because the amount of money that came in,
all has to correlate back to the
60% back to the farmer.
Right.
It really does not benefit him to be clever, either with the weights or with the grading of the paddy. Now, a lot of this is the perception that the farmer has. And I really do believe that, and know that there are honest millers out there. I've done work with many of them. If you can remove the motivation for cleverness, you will increase the trust. And if you increase the trust, you will very quickly develop the culture where the miller and the farmer recognize that their interests are the same. Right now, their interests are not the same because the miller is in a position, because of the secrecy, because nobody wants to disclose how much he's selling the rice for. He's in a position to take the bulk of the profit margins for this product. But if his sale price is tied to his purchase price, he loses that motivation, he loses that incentive, and suddenly the only benefits left are benefits which are beneficial to both farmer and miller, which is amount of production and value on the world market.
Right. So, Tim, just to end on this topic, one of the definitions, and I'll say this, hopefully it doesn't fall on deaf ears, but one of the definitions of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a different result. So when I hear solutions like this, when I hear proposals like this, obviously the first thought that comes to my mind is, let me try and listen to this a little bit more closely, because at this point in time, I have nothing to lose. If the system that we have continuously been using year after year has been failing the rice farmers, then they have to start considering something else. Okay, whether or not they believe this can work, options are now on the table for them to start to discuss with each other and come up with plans moving forward. And I think that is what, this whole idea of inclusion and inclusive governance is. I'm very happy that you brought up the idea that this is what new ideas this is the type of new ideas that come to the table when you have new politicians and new political parties brought into the mix. And I think this is a critical aspect of understanding these types of ideas.
More than that, Kian, when a new suggestion is made, the suggestion needs to be thrown out into the public domain so that the people who are the real experts, the rice farmers and the rice millers, can look at it, pick at it, see if it can be avoided, evaded, see if there are any gaps in the system, and participate in an area that they know about so that we can move forward with a finished product. And it's not about aggrandizement of a group. It is about decentralization of power and passing power and responsibility to the people who are benefiting from the area of endeavor. So here you have people who are producing rice. They need to be involved in ideas and decision making and put in a system where they are all motivated to work together so that there is a shared benefit, not be put in a position where they're fighting against each other. So that each of them has to go as supplicant to government to come to intervene twice a year. That can't be the system.
And a continued government dependency, which creates, the whole situation that we're constantly in economically.
I want to say too that if the farmers are squeezed, as they are being squeezed, to the point where they are closing down operations and cultivation fields are not being used, overall production will reduce.
Right.
And if overall production reduces, the millers will begin to lose.
Yeah.
So we got to find a way around it.
Yeah.
It's short-sighted.
Correct.
To say let's squeeze the farmers.
Let's squeeze the farmers. Less rice produced, less rice exported. Everyone loses.
Everyone loses.
And again, we have another. And with this being said, Tim, it's a very interesting concept because, as you said at the beginning, it is really only the oil industry and oil-related businesses that are flourishing at the moment. We continuously talk about, Guyana is this booming economy and is the number one growing economy in the world, et cetera, et cetera. But really and truly, what this particular farming scenario has showed us, which is one of our fundamental economic backbones, is that we are living on a propped up industry that is kind of creating not a very true picture of what is happening on the ground in the economy.
I think that's a part of it, yes.
Right.
Another thing that needs to change, I believe, is this system of leases of state land. I think the time has come to understand that if we are going to raise our people up, we have to give them the equity. And it's time that people who have been occupying state land for a long period of time are given the option to become owners to buy. Because that increases their equity, it increases their value, it increases their borrowing power at the bank, it will put more money in the hands of more people, and it will help the economy to circulate.
No more of this leased land. We have to start talking about actual ownership, actual transports being given for these lands.
I think it's about time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think we're watching too much of that on government leaves land and people getting 100 years and up the highway trying to plant farms, but actually not being able to carry those to the bank. And, it's putting them on the back foot economically and to start off their business or grow their business for that matter. Because as we know, access to financing is probably one of the main factors that is hindering business in this country.
Of course, let me hasten to say that if under the Act, the commission that decides who's getting land is all appointed by the minister, we shouldn't be selling land or giving land away. The opposition needs to be involved in that process so that there is fair allocation and everybody has a voice.
I have something to say on that very recently. Talking about inclusive governance and One Guyana, now these two political parties, the PPP and the PNC, working together. You know what I found a very interesting fact? Not recently, it's something that I've known about for a while, but it's only now come to light during, as in my head at least, with all that's occurring with the division now continuing and growing. And when we talk about inclusive governance and that you're a government for everyone, I always find it interesting that when the PPP are in power, there are absolutely no APNU, AFC representatives on any of the boards. They refuse all of the positions. And I found it even more curious that when the PPP were in power, they took none of the board positions offered to them by the APNU AFC. They refused to take part in the governance of the country when they were not in complete control. And to me, that always sets off alarm bells. If you continue to speak that you're here for everyone and you're here to do what's best for the people, why then, when you have to share a little bit of power, why are you not participating at all?
It leaves a lot to be desired in our leadership, doesn't it?
Yeah. So speaking, on this topic, another big headlines situation that's occurring, and I don't know if anybody has seen this, it's in all the papers at the moment, is the e-governance one card system that the government is in the process of trying to implement. Funny enough, something that I don't think fundamentally I disagree with. I like the idea of easier access to information. I like the idea that I can take one card into wherever it needs to go. So, like our SIN numbers or various specific numbers allocated to us in first world countries, England, Canada, etc. And I find it very interesting that a good idea like this has now become very shadowed by by a very, what is being claimed to be a very corrupt deal. And what the allegations are is that the government has sole sourced this $35 million US contract to a German company to create this this system of one-stop e-governance, where you can get your, whether it be your you can see somebody's criminal record, they can have it as proof of address, ID, banking information, maybe tax rating, things like that, credit rating, things like that. So they have now said, it was raised by critics that this was a corrupt deal and should not have been sole sourced. The government then rebutted that by saying it is under the national security umbrella that gives us the legal right to sole source this $35 million US contract. So I say $35 million US contract because that amount of money bothers me a little bit, because in my mind, that money can be used to, maybe raise salaries, maybe give a bigger bonus at the end of the year to public servants, maybe, along those lines. But please tell me what your thoughts are on that scenario and what's happening there.
Well, when I first heard of the decision to synchronize ID cards, I really thought that the government has finally been listening to ANOG. Because for some time now, we have been advocating and making the point that this isn't a new idea, and for some reason we haven't been doing it. But there needs to be a single identification number. In the States, they call it Social Security, they call it something else elsewhere. That every Guyanese is given at birth and identifies that Guyanese, let's call it Social Security number or a tax identification number, anything you want to, through school, into work, into retirement, to death. And that number should be the number that relates to his national ID card, to his passport, to his NIS card, to every document that he relies on. And I'll tell you why this can be helpful. First of all, it will allow anybody to trace assets in terms of buying and selling immovable property, in terms of bank accounts, in terms of NIS accounts, whether this person is employed or unemployed and has registered for NIS. During school, it will allow the authorities to see the age of the person so that they know that this person is this person's mother, because ANOG is also advocating that mothers of school-age children should be getting quarterly sums of money from the NIS to help maintain those children. That during school age, the person is entitled to these benefits as a school child. After leaving school, the person then, you look to see that they have registered for NIS, because if they're unemployed, they should be getting unemployment benefits, but if they are employed, they should be paying NIS. You can then link the NIS to their GRA to see if they're paying taxes. If they're unemployed, they won't be paying taxes, but they should be paying taxes. You will be able to compare the taxes they pay and the income they declare against their NIS payments. You will be able then to compare that with the properties they purchase, the properties to sell, to see if there is a correlation and if it makes sense with the income they're declaring. All of this can be done much more easily if there is a single identification number that identifies a Guyanese citizen from cradle to grave. Now, the government has said they're doing that. Power to them. Excellent. It will bring more Guyanese into the net of paying NIS, paying tax, being accountable in the magistrate's court. You heard the other day that somebody had been caught driving drunk, and when they've checked, they found that he had a fake license.
Yeah.
That would be an impossibility if the number on the license was a number that applied to him in every area of endeavor, GRA and everything, so that when the magistrate who convicted him endorsed on his license, he mustn't get one. It would be impossible for him to get another license because that same number would pop up when he went for the license. So these are things that create greater accountability, greater transparency. It's a good idea. And then when you're implementing this good idea, you sole source it, you award one set of money with no explanation, and you call it national security. Now, national security is something which arises when there is a threat. I noticed that some folk have been talking about a foreign threat. I'm not sure it needs to be a foreign threat. It could be a local threat. But we have had no change in status quo in this country over the last 40 years dealing with people's identification that gives rise to any issue that we can call national security. There has been no change to say suddenly we have an issue of national security. So I'm afraid that doesn't fly. But there's a larger problem here. And the larger problem is that when our leaders have so much money thrown at them because of gas and oil, and when they are in complete control, having appointed all the committees, all the commissions, all the boards of access to this money, they control Parliament, so they could spend money and go to Parliament and get approval by their own majority in Parliament for the expenditure of this money. There is no one to complain, because the people who complain are silenced by the fact that they get in a new road. They're not asking how the contract was awarded. They get in a new bridge, they get a new drain, they get in a new housing scheme. There are no questions asked as to how these transactions are done and if they're kickbacks, if it's done fairly, if it's done transparently. No questions asked. And there is no outside control to monitor it. And yet, people will not complain. People will say, good job, I got a new road. It's such a sad simplification, and yet it's hard to fight that now. So, somebody came out, Human Rights Association, to say, wait, y'all award $35 million and you're bypassing the procurement system. What's the procurement system? The procurement board is a national board that's created to supervise the award of contracts. Contracts must be awarded according to a fixed scheme, which includes publishing, inviting bids, publishing it in the papers, putting it online, a nice transparent process. For you to bid, you have to pre-qualify, you have to show you're experienced, you have to show you have the employees, you have the skills. If it needs an engineer, you have to show you have an engineer. You got the equipment, that you've done this kind of job before. All of these things you got to show. And then you got the loopholes. So the big loophole I want to point to is that there is something called a request for quotations. And at a certain level, a certain amount of money, if the contract has this value, the administrative area that is tendering out, inviting tenders to build this bridge or this road or dig this drain, is entitled to invite proposals from three people, from three contractors. They pick the contractors. So I'm there in Essequibo, I'm in Pomeroon, and I want to build a new stelling, a charity. And I got my neighbor that I want to get the job. So I decide I'm going to go this route, that I'm going to ask for quotations from three contractors. And I tell my neighbor he's one of them. Give me a quotation. He got his equipment next door, nice and ready to set up. And the other two contractors, I'll go to Barbies to find them. So I got these two boys in quarantine, and I invite them to make bids for a very lucrative project to build this wharf in Charity. Who's going to win that bid? And that's what we see. So there are loopholes that need to be plugged. And in addition to plugging the loopholes, there needs to be criminal and monetary sanctions for officials who bypass the system without a good reason. If there was a criminal and a monetary sanction for an official who bypassed the system, the official who bypassed the system to award a $35 million US contract to that German would have to, when prosecuted, say in a court, national security. And I wonder if that would withstand scrutiny. But as long as we have a situation where there's no sanctions and the 7 people who comprise the board in procurement under the Act are all appointed, yes, by who? By the minister. So that there's nobody from opposition, no independent voice, because the minister has decided who he wants to go in there. We're not going to have a situation that is transparent and above board and that can be defended. And that needs to change.
Tim, I'm sure, like most people, I'm always educated by your your legal mind, because I think what a lot of us miss is that attention to detail. You know, we often are given the facade of what is currently occurring, but not necessarily understanding why, or more importantly, what the other options are. How can it be fixed? Why is this, what is it occurring? Why would it occur? And who's benefiting, more importantly? So I think those are critical points that we have to ensure that, somebody is always creating that system of accountability. And I think it's getting more and more relevant now as more money comes into the country. As we're watching certain industries, as we've discussed on this program, contracting. We're watching, as the finance minister explained in his last budget speech, you have the rice industry and the mining industry all contracting. And you really have to start to point and ask questions why. I mean, the word Dutch disease is often thrown around because of this obviously overwhelming dependency that is kind of developing around the oil industry. And what we need to be very careful with is making sure that all Guyanese are benefiting from this, as I know you like to say, free money. Because as Guyana invests very little into the oil industry, we are reaping the benefits. And that money needs to be utilized for all Guyanese and all industries to ensure sustainability. And I think that's what most of these arguments are kind of surrounded by, in ensuring that not only are the people on the ground benefiting and there's an actual tangible, benefit from this situation, but also ensuring that systems are in place, that we are utilizing the new resources, like you're saying, like we've discussed here, just the e-governance, for example, the social security number is not only benefiting the Guyanese, on headlines and sounds like a great idea, but systems are put in place to ensure that everyone equally benefits from this. And everyone has the opportunity as Guyanese to, again, receive their share, if you will, because as we all know, this all belongs to every Guyanese.
I think it's very easy for a party loyalist to brush this off and say, oh, our leader is a good man, our leader is an honest man. But this is not about the individual. We don't have kings and queens. We have people who all have feet of clay. There's no blue blood here.
Yeah.
We all got red blood. And for that reason, it is important to look at the system we have and to try to analyze it to see how that system can be bypassed and avoided in a corrupt way and plug those gaps. It's not about the individuals. And we need to get over that knee-jerk reaction, oh, our leader's a good man, or, oh, the other side are terrible, because both sides say this. And we need to say, well, this is the system, and this is how the system can be avoided or corrupted. Let us see how to fix it.
And Tim, on that note, we're going to end. And it's funny you end on that, because the next conversation, I think, is starting to burn at the feet of the government, is the fact that we just recently, in our last 2020 election, dealt with a political party that made an attempt to rig the election. And with that being said, I think arguments are being had now that not enough has been done to prevent that from happening again. And not enough systems have been changed and laws in place to ensure that Guyana does not end up there again. Because, as we all know with politics, people change, situations change, parties change, and that is the inevitable side of politics. And if we were worried about our future and we're not learning from our past, well,
Kian, it's funny you say that, because Anok had made proposals for change when invited to do so. And I was a bit taken aback at the proposals which were rejected by the government when implementing the legislative changes to try to ensure that the system worked. I know we don't have time to deal with that now, but in another forum we will. But that is something I think we need to address and we need to discuss.
Great. on that note, once again, thank you all for joining us. The conversation is stimulating. We hope that, you know, the rice farmers in Essequibo and around the country have had a chance to hear the proposal, and it will spread and maybe become a topic of conversation in the coming weeks as this situation evolves. So on that note, my name is Kian Jaboor. Thank you again to my guest, Mr. Timothy Jonas, for joining me. And next week, we will be right back here, as usual, on aPolitically Incorrect Guyana. My name is Kian Jaboor. Thank you for joining us.